The afternoon had been so ordinary that no one could have imagined the terror about to unfold. Families had gathered along the riverbank for a weekend picnic. The sun sparkled off the rippling water. Laughter floated on the breeze, and even the air smelled of freshly cut grass and fried snacks brought from home. But in the midst of this normality, one couple's world was about to shatter in a way that would haunt the entire town forever. Their 6-month-old baby boy, curious and restless as babies often are, had been wriggling on a soft blanket while his parents fussed with unpacking food and chatting with friends. And though the mother glanced at him occasionally, she trusted the nearness of the blanket and the softness of the ground to keep him safe. But fate does not warn before it strikes. In a single, unguarded moment, the baby's tiny hands carried him further than expected, closer to the river's edge, and before his parents realized, his small body tipped forward and vanished into the rushing water. The sound of the splash froze everyone in place. Then the mother screamed a roar, piercing sound that cut the cheerful air to silent sand. The father lunged desperately, but his hands closed on nothing but wet grass as the current swept the child away. Panic broke out as people shouted, some running along the bank, others yelling to throw something into the water, but the river moved mercilessly fast and no one dared dive in. That was when Max, a German shepherd, canine officer who had been on a casual patrol with his handler nearby, burst into action. His ears had pricked at the commotion. His eyes locked instantly on the flailing bundle being carried downstream. And before anyone could stop him, he bounded forward, muscles coiled like springs, and leapt into the churning current. His handler cried out his name, torn between pride and fear. But Max didn't need permission. This was instinct, duty, and courage fused into one. The crowd gasped as the dog disappeared beneath the white foam, seconds ticking like hours until at last his head broke the surface again, jaws clenched firmly but gently on the baby's tiny shirt. The sight was unbelievable, the dog's powerful legs thrashing against the current, dragging the child back toward safety even as the river fought to pull them under. Every stroke looked like a battle, his eyes blazing with fierce determination. And slowly, inch by inch, he gained ground until at last his handler waded in to seize the child and haul Max ashore. The baby was coughing and sputtering, but alive, miraculously alive, and the mother collapsed around him, kissing his wet hair and sobbing uncontrollably while the father trembled beside her in shock. Cheers erupted, hands clapped, people called. Max, a hero, children cried out his name with awe. And for one breathless moment, it seemed like a story that would end in triumph, a miracle to tell for generations. But as the mother pulled the soaked cloth from her baby's arm to check him more closely, the joy drained from her face. Her voice faltered into silence, her lips quivered, and then her scream tore the air once more, though this time it wasn't fear of losing him, but horror at what she now saw. There, etched unmistakably on the pale, delicate skin of her son's upper arm, was a marker strange, crescent-shaped scar with jagged edges, darker than a bruise and older than any injury. Could be a mark that seemed burned into him as though by some unseen hand. Gasps rippled through the crowd as people leaned in to see, whispers rising in a storm of unease. And the father's face drained of color as he muttered in disbelief, "No, it can't be." The joyous mood crumbled into dread, and in that moment the story of a heroic rescue twisted into the beginning of something much darker, for the mark on the baby's skin was not new, and it was not random. It was the sign of a secret long buried, a truth the river had guarded for decades. The baby was alive, breathing weakly but safe, yet no one could tear their eyes away from the eerie mark stamped into his flesh. A mark that looked less like an accidental blemish and more like a deliberate carving of some forgotten symbol. And as the mother clutched her son tighter, her tears of relief turned into tears of fear. She kept whispering that it hadn't been there before, that she had bathed him that very morning and his skin had been flawless, soft and unmarked. Yet now it was as if the river had returned him with a signature burned into his body, proof that he belonged not wholly to them but to something else. The father, pale and trembling, pressed his hand to his forehead as though trying to block out a memory, muttering words that made little sense to the crowd but carried enough weight to send a shiver through those who heard them. Not again. Please, not again. Around them, the spectators whispered in hushed tones, afraid to speak too loudly, as if the river itself was listening. Then, through the murmurs, the frail voice of an old woman rose, clear and sharp despite her age, cutting through the confusion like a blade. She shuffled forward with the slow determination of someone who knew her words would not be welcomed but had to be said. Her eyes clouded yet burning with recognition, and she pointed at the child's arm with a gnarled finger that shook slightly but never wavered. "I know that mark," she croaked, and instantly the chatter died down. "I have seen it before, many years ago, when another baby disappeared into this river and was returned days later with the same cursed sign." Gasps rippled through the gathering mothers clutching their own children protectively, while fathers exchanged uneasy glances. The woman's story spilled into the silence like poison. She spoke of a family long ago whose infant vanished mysteriously near the water, and though the child had been found alive, he carried the exact same crescent-shaped scar that boy had, grown up restless, plagued by nightmares and strange whispers only he could hear, forever drawn to the riverbanks, until, one fateful night, he disappeared into its depths, again this time never to return. The crowd shuddered, as if the past had risen from the grave to stand among them. The handler of Max, though skeptical by nature and trained to rely on evidence, could not shake the unease curling in his stomach. Kneeling, he examined the baby's arm carefully, tracing the mark with his eyes but not daring to touch it. "This didn't come from the water," he said firmly, though his voice was low and unsettled. "This isn't a cut, not a bruise, not something recent. This looks old, like it's part of him." His words only deepened the dread, for if the mark was not newly made, then it meant the baby had carried it all along hidden until now, revealed only when the river had nearly taken him. The father let out a strangled sound, and suddenly, unable to keep the burden of his secret any longer, he confessed in a broken voice that silenced even the bravest hearts. "He isn't ours," he said, the words tearing out of him like shards of glass. The mother's sobs grew louder as he continued. "We found him months ago, wrapped in a blanket near this very river. We had no children of our own, and we thought it was fate that God had given us a son. We never told anyone. We never asked questions, because we wanted him. We loved him. We couldn't let him die." The weight of his confession fell on the crowd like a hammer, leaving only silence and disbelief. Some gasped in outrage, others whispered prayers under their breath, but everyone felt the chill of realization. The child was not abandoned by chance, he was left there for a reason. The old woman shook her head slowly, her voice dropping to a haunted whisper. "The river takes and the river gives, but it does not give freely. That mark is its claim, its curse, a reminder that the boy belongs to forces older than this town, older than all of us. Fear thickened the air until it was hard to breathe, the baby's cries echoing like a warning across the bank. And though the parents clutched him tighter, their love fierce and desperate, they knew that the truth had been revealed, and the truth was darker than anything they had ever imagined. At the hospital that night, the sterile white lights and the beeping of machines did little to ease the growing dread. For though the baby lay safe in a crib, with blankets tucked carefully around him and his chest rising and falling with steady breaths, the mark on his arm glared like a wound that could not be ignored, an enigma the doctors could neither explain nor erase. And their puzzled frowns only deepened the sense that this was something beyond medicine, something that belonged not to science but to legend. They prodded and tested, scanning the child with every device available, yet every result came back normal. His lungs were strong, his heart steady, his blood clean, his body unharmed, and yet the crescent scar remained, as if etched by an invisible fire that had seared itself into his flesh long before he had been found. Nurses whispered in uneasy voices when they thought no one was listening, one claiming she had seen a similar mark once in an old photograph from the archives, another insisting that when she touched the child's arm the skin felt warmer around, the scar almost like a faint burn that never cooled. But none dared speak too loudly for fear that their words might draw unwanted attention. The authorities, however, had already taken notice. Files long forgotten were dragged out from dusty cabinets, reports of children who had gone missing decades ago. Some returned and others never seen again, and among those records was the story the old woman had spoken of, the boy who bore the same mark and vanished into the river forever. Investigators compared the patterns, and the resemblance was chilling to marks identical in shape and placement, carved into two children, separated by years, but bound by something sinister and unknown. It was then that the father, racked by guilt, broke down completely, unable to carry the truth any longer. And with a voice heavy with despair, he revealed the secret he had never dared share, not even with his wife in full detail. He confessed that his younger brother had been that boy, the one taken by the river so many years ago, the one who had vanished and never returned. And as he spoke, his wife gasped, her hands clutching at her chest as though her heart itself had cracked. "I never wanted to believe it," he whispered hoarsely, eyes red with unshed tears. "But when I saw the mark on this baby, I knew it was the same. It's the same curse, the same evil, and somehow it has returned." The revelation spread like wildfire through the hospital and soon through the town itself, people murmuring about bloodlines and curses, about rivers that remembered and never forgave, and whispers turned to fear as parents held their children closer, casting suspicious glances toward the water they had once trusted for fishing and play. Some claimed the mark was proof of a cult that had lived by the river generations ago, a group that branded their children in crescent shapes during rituals to bind them to dark powers, while others insisted the river was no mere body of water, but a living force that marked its chosen, taking them back when the time was right. In the midst of the chaos stood Max, the K9 who had saved the child, his golden eyes fixed constantly on the baby as if sensing a danger invisible to humans. His body tense, ears pricked, growling softly whenever the boy cried or when the sound of the river drifted through the hospital's open windows. His handler noticed, troubled by the dog's unease, for Max was brave and steady, a veteran of rescues and dangers, yet here he seemed restless, alert, and oddly protective, as though he knew that dragging the child from the river had not ended the battle but merely begun it. Night after night, strange things were reported. the baby waking with sudden shrieks, his tiny fingers clawing at the air as if reaching for something unseen, or else laughing softly at shadows on the wall as if someone were whispering to him. From the darkness, nurses swore they heard faint splashing sounds, though no water was near. And once a mother in the ward claimed she saw the mark on his arm glow faintly in the moonlight streaming through the glass. The parents tried to stay strong, rocking him, praying over him, telling themselves he was just a child like any other, but deep inside they feared the truth that their son was not wholly theirs, that the river had not given him freely, and that what had been saved from drowning was not only a baby but a mystery drenched in horror, a secret that would not rest until it was fulfilled. Weeks passed after the rescue, yet the shadow of that day never lifted, for though the baby grew stronger and appeared healthy, babbling like any other child and even smiling with the sweetness of innocence, the mark on his arm remained like a permanent reminder that his life was tethered to something darker than anyone dared admit, and the townspeople, once overjoyed at Max's heroism, now looked upon the family with wary eyes, whispering behind closed doors, keeping their distance as if proximity alone might invite the river's curse upon them. The parents tried desperately to carry on, to live as though nothing had changed, but fear seeped into every corner of their lives. At night, the baby would wake crying with piercing shrieks, not the ordinary cries of hunger or discomfort, but cries that chilled the blood, cries that always seemed to come at the hour when the river outside roared loudest beneath the moonlight. And sometimes he would stop crying suddenly and stare fixedly toward the window as though listening to a voice only he could hear. Once, the father awoke in terror to find the baby not in his crib but lying near the open front door, the cool night breeze brushing over him, and when he scooped him up frantically, he swore the mark on his son's arm glowed faintly as though illuminated from within. The mother, torn between love and dread, refused to let go of him even for a moment, keeping him pressed close to her chest during the day and sleeping with her hand always resting on him at night. Yet still the sense grew that the river was calling, biding its time until it could reclaim what it had marked. Max, the loyal canine who had dragged the child from the water, never left his side, standing guard at the crib, barking furiously whenever the baby stirred, his body stiff and alert whenever they ventured close to the riverbank, his handler often remarking that he had never seen the dog so unrelenting, so vigilant, as if he understood that his rescue had not ended the danger but merely delayed it. The town grew restless, stories resurfacing of the ancient cult that had once lived by the water, branding their children with crescent marks during rituals to bind them to the river spirit they worshipped, a spirit said to be both protector and predator, giving life and taking it back at will. Old journals uncovered by local historians spoke of the cult's downfall, how they had been driven into the river by fearful villagers, but the texts hinted that their vow had never been broken, that the river itself had absorbed their covenant and would continue marking children through generations. These revelations only deepened the parents' terror, for if their child was bound by something as ancient and unrelenting as a river's curse, how could love alone protect him? Yet still they clung to hope, believing that Max's presence was no accident, that perhaps the dog was a shield placed in their lives for a reason. But even Max could not explain the night when the father returned home late from work to find the baby missing again, his wife unconscious on the floor as though struck by unseen hands, and the front door wide open to the sound of rushing water. Panic consumed him as he raced toward the river, heart pounding. And there in the moonlight he saw his son sitting on the bank, calm and silent, tiny hands resting on the ground, the crescent mark glowing like silver fire against his skin. For one horrifying moment, the father swore the water itself rose to meet the child, curling like fingers reaching for him. But then Max barreled past, teeth bared, barking with such ferocity that the night itself seemed to tremble. He grabbed the child's blanket in his jaws and dragged him away from the edge, growling until the shimmering ripples settled and the river looked once again like ordinary water. Though the father knew in his soul it was anything but. That night, holding his baby with tears streaming down his face, he realized that this was not a curse that could be broken, not a fight that could be won easily. It was a battle that would stretch across years, a constant struggle between love and the relentless pull of something ancient and unseen. The town never forgot the story, whispering that the river had marked its chosen once again, waiting patiently for the day when it would collect what it believed belonged to it. And though the parents vowed never to let their son out of their sight, and though Max kept his eternal watch with eyes that saw what humans could not, everyone knew the truth in their hearts. The mystery was not solved, only postponed, for the mark was not fading and the river was not done. What began as a miraculous rescue had become an unfinished tale of dread, a secret carved into flesh, and a reminder that sometimes a dog's heroism does more than save a life. It exposes a darkness that no one is prepared to face.